Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of Argam Talks. So this podcast is going to be aimed at product management, voice AI, entrepreneurship, and our first guest is my good friend Vache Moroyan. He's the CPO of he's a CPO as well, but he's CPO of Observe.ai. I've known him for years. We've both been in product management a long time. So Vache, just give us a quick intro about yourself. What are you doing now, and what kind of what things are you working on that's exciting over there?
Argam, great to be with you this morning. Super pumped to be speaking with you about all of these topics. So, what have I been up to? Been at Observe AI now for the past, roughly 2.5 years. And my goodness, it's been a whirlwind since I joined. I think I joined about 3 to 4 months after the launch of Chat GPT. And, it feels like it's just been moving at a tremendous pace since I joined the company in terms of the technology evolution, what we're trying to do as well, from a company perspective and the products that we've launched. The pace has just been really, really incredible. So, from a product perspective, just been focused on making sure that we're constantly innovating, within the company, staying up to speed on the latest technologies that have been launched and so forth. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's kind of what I've been up to.
So give me in 30 seconds, if you can, what Observe does.
Yeah, Observe AI is focused on customer experience, leveraging AI, right? And I think that there's a lot of you know different types of customer experience software products that exist out there. Some are more focused on just capturing voice of the customer. Some are looking at what's going on in social avenues and so forth, right? So at Observe AI, our focus, primarily is through the contact center channel, right? So, inbound contact centers, outbound contact centers, both for sales as well as support use cases. And so, what we're building is a platform that handles the upfront automation with respect to handling conversations with customers when they're trying to contact a contact center or trying to get help, from a particular business. The second part is augmenting the experience of a human agent using AI to help assist them as a conversation is taking place with a human being. And then the third is being able to assess what happens after those conversations take place, to be able to analyze, what took place. How do I improve my products and services? How do I improve the operations of my contact center and help coach those agents to become much, much better while remaining compliant? As you can imagine, we work with a lot of, industries that are highly
Yeah.
regulated in financial services and healthcare. So,
Yeah.
so that's kind of the end-to-end product there that we support.
Yeah. So both of us have been in the product management game a long time. We've been developing really awesome products with lots of users. I've been mostly in consumer. You've been mostly, I think, B2B. But in the end, the art and science of product management remains the same. What in the past, let's say 2.5, 3 years, how have you changed your leadership style to integrate with AI tools? What has changed in product management?
Yeah, I think the big thing has been, as we're thinking about building software, a lot of it was, when you think about building SaaS-based software, a lot of it is, workflows. How do I think about building workflows? How do I make sure that I help, essentially human beings go from X to Y, right? So they have their job today. Most of the time in B2B SaaS, you're building something that is, you're looking at their job, you're looking at what are the things they do on a day-to-day basis, right? And product is getting in there and saying, okay, how do I make their life better to generate
Right.
some kind of ROI as a result? And so that is, I would say, more or less like traditionally how things were being built, both on product and design.
Yeah.
Now, I think the evolution over the last like 2.5 years, and I would say over the last 1 year, if I were to really look at that, is now you have to think very differently about building software.
Hmm.
And the reason for that is it's not just the, Gen AI and so forth. Gen AI is kind of the enabler of it, but the agentic frameworks that have now been put in place. So now it's a bit like, how do I think about, building and solving particular problems using the power of LLMs in an, AI agent framework kind of a way. So
Hmm.
something that might have been a workflow where there's like 3, 4, 5 steps, that might now be accomplished by putting in a set of prompts, applying, various tools to solve that, the thing that you're prompting, and then allowing the LLM to take action and solve that particular use case. And I think
Yeah.
that is I would say that has been a very challenging thing for, broadly speaking, for PMs to actually embrace, is that, oh, my thinking now has to change. And it's
Yes.
not that people were born with like, oh, you're an AI agent PM or you're not, but it's more about understanding and playing a bit around a bit with these various technologies to see what is the art of possible, and trying to build things out so that they can incorporate that in their product thinking when they're
Yeah.
starting out with their problem statement down to like the opportunity, the solution, MVP, et cetera. So it's changing the way that they think about solving a particular problem.
Yeah, so typically I would go about and tell my team I always need a concept document, I
Mm.
need a wireframe, I need you to build out a PRD, I need this and that. Are you still going through that entire process with your team, or are you just saying build me a prototype using, Cursor or Replit or Lovable or whatever it may be? How are you thinking about this with all these like tools available?
I think it depends a bit on like what they're working on, right? So if they are working on something that is, let's call it like fairly iterative and it's an earlier stage product, then I still want them to go through the process of, let me put a one pager together, right? Let me go through and validate what it is that I'm launching. I mean, in situations where we've kind of just launched something, and especially if we're live with customers, if
Hmm.
something breaks, then it's like, well, why did it get there? Like, did we not think through it enough? And
Yeah.
I get it. You want to be able to launch and go really, really fast and iterate. But when you're dealing with enterprise customers, it's a little bit different. So, what I still like to do is add some process into the mix to say, okay, did you check off the things that needed to be done before this thing went live? And a lot of that is done through upfront validation of, hey, I have an idea. I want to play with it and test it out in my playground. But before it actually hits production, how do I make sure that that thing is not going to fall on its face when it actually gets out there? Is it going through, the same, I would say, kind of like rigid approach that we had before? Perhaps not. I think we've scaled that back a little bit, but those things are still in place in order to prevent, and those guardrails are in place to prevent,
What was that rigid
issues
approach?
going down.
What was that
Yeah.
rigid approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think the rigid approach was, you know, where there was, you know, there's validation that still takes place, but then, you know, I would say like going and, introducing like just much more, I would say, rigid validation like throughout even the engineering like development process, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's where you're allowing the engineering team, and I think this applies more to eng than it does to product actually, is
Uh-huh.
to have a little bit more like freedom in that stage to go and experiment and test things out. Oftentimes, I mean, you're probably aware of this. Hey, we have deadlines. We have to hit certain
Correct.
deadlines, and so now it's like, okay, you want them to experiment like a little bit more over there versus like they must ship by like X date. And I'm actually okay with them taking a little bit longer on the Eng side to go through some of those iteration processes versus making it a little bit more, waterfally of like, nope, we have to ship by this date. And that's kind of it. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I would say has largely changed, is like when it hits that step on the engineering side to allow there to be a lot more uh, experimentation, particularly on some of the earlier stage products.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, makes
but
sense.
it has been, what I will say is this: the shift to this model has taken time because you are having to change habits, and some of those habits are very, very difficult to break. And we are still going through a lot of those a lot of those changes internally, I would
Well,
say.
what's the like, you don't have to say, but is there like
Yeah.
one particular habit that you've seen consistent across your team that's the hardest to break?
I would say it's more, when you're looking at, broadly speaking, and talking with other, product leaders as well, is that, the habit has been more that in B2B SaaS, you have certain deadlines that you got to hit. There are certain needs that your customers have, especially as you have like a lot more larger customers. So
Yeah.
those dates matter because they're depending on you in order to make other things happen. And I would say, you know, uh, working more with your customer success teams, working directly with customers in order to help make sure that there's alignment of like, hey, I know there's these deadlines here. We're working on something really innovative. We want to be able to work with you to, deliver this thing that's going to be way more awesome than what you have today. Some of
Yeah.
those things are going to take a little bit longer to bake. So it's a little bit of a different mindset of even establishing expectations with customers to say some of these things might take a little bit more time because we're all still learning the power of these things. And I think
Yeah.
that's the habit change. It's a bit like when you're going, with your go to market and even with your customers, establishing that some of these experiments are just going to take a little bit longer than what we think. It's not so deterministic to say, "Hey, I made workflow X better." It's like a reinvention of workflow X or what you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. So let's jump to voice AI. So um, Observe is also in the voice AI game where you're deploying voice AI agents, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. And voice AI, in my opinion, and I think is a consumer app. It's not necessarily a B2B tool because your end user, your customer is actually the person calling in. And I think the other customer is obviously the client, but the end user is the customer. So it is a consumer app. So given that, how are you putting the art of product management and the science of product management with the people creating these voice agents? Because it's a prompt, number one,
Yeah.
and it's a bunch of flows and API calls or calls to an MCP. So are you just saying, you know what, let's write the prompt and let's test it internally? Are you saying let's get a document together that has all the flows and then figure out how to make that a prompt? Or are you using the other product? Like it's quite unclear how to do this because typically with a consumer app, whether it's website app, I've done TV apps, I've done mobile apps, I've done websites. You always have a wireframe, PRD, you go through
That's right.
engineering, you figure out what's going on, then you initially launch it, you put it in front of some customers. We would do this thing back in the day we called mall testing. We go to a mall, put a phone in front of someone and ask them feedback. Uh, you don't have that with voice AI. It's not a visual clue. And on top of that, conversations go in so many different angles where it's not like I want the customer to do this one thing and click this one button or go through this one flow. So what are your thoughts on that?
I do think there is a lot of truth to the fact that it is a consumer application because now you've created something that is not a back office thing. You've created an application now that is hitting a consumer, much like, let's say you were to, put an ad out there, right? Or you were going to create historically like some kind of a chatbot or FAQ bot or like something along those lines, right? Voice AI is very similar to that. The way I look at it is your what are the businesses that we're working with trying to accomplish? They're actually trying to use voice AI. Yes, there's the, let's call it the improvement from a metric perspective of reducing the load on their contact center or
Right.
potentially replacing their agents or having their agents focus more on level 2 or level 3 type of support issues that come up, right? That's what they're
Right.
trying to do, is to optimize it. But they're also trying to make sure that it is an extension of their brand. They want their customer to have a great experience when they're calling into the contact center.
Yep.
So, how do they accomplish that? Well, now you've created something that is highly flexible. It sounds like a human, although you likely have to disclose that it is not a human being from a
Yeah.
compliance perspective.
Yeah.
And
Now
so they're trying
there's
to,
starting to be stuff like
th-
that. Yeah.
there's definitely that.
Yeah.
And so when you're thinking about building that consumer app, you actually have to allow the flexibility to be able to sound like their brand, which means the voices that you're using or the types of personas that you're using, the ability to control those personas. If you're, let's say, in financial services, it's probably a little bit more professional, more of a serious tone. If it's in retail, maybe it's a little bit more outgoing, again, depending on your type of brand, right? If it's a uh, something that's more focused on e-commerce or services, it may be a little bit more engaging and so forth. So it
Yeah.
really just depends on a lot of those things. So you want to be able to
So
have
do
the
you write
the
like
control.
have someone write a concept document, share that with the client, and then you get feedback on that before creating the agent? Like, how are you explaining how you gathering the requirements of what it should be to then get it to the client?
Yeah, it's a little bit. I would say it's been a bit of a learning process, which is everybody is kind of doing a little bit different. So, a concept doc is something that, we essentially look at and say, like, what are the requirements, right? I think we're kind of saying the same thing of
Yeah.
what they're trying to build. And it's trying to, oftentimes, Argam is like to start off small, which is how do we start off maybe with something internal that they use? They may have an internal, like, help desk or something like that that they want to deploy
Yeah.
on just to get their feet wet. And they kind of build out to say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. I may try to just gather information up front and then pass it over to an agent no matter what. That is one example. Other ones are, hey, I want to try to automate like a very much more deterministic flow, but see if you can do it using LLMs. I think the part where there's uh, I would say learning, and I don't want to use the word friction, but it's more about learning, is that okay, now that I want to go build this out, how do I actually do that? Because if people are like, oh yeah, chat GPT, just throw it into like, as a prompt and it's going to work, right? It's magic. And that is absolutely not true. You
Yeah.
actually have to understands what are the capabilities, how is the application, set up to be able to package everything up that you've now defined, and then that is now being sent over to the LLM to make the decision. And,
Yeah.
and as a part of that, what are the tools and things that I need access to as a part of that configuration? See, many people actually don't think about that. They'll say, oh, okay, largely speaking, this is what I want the agent to do. But in that requirement doc, as you actually go through it and you're like, oh, I actually need to make a call to a backend API in order to get that information so it's available to me. And
Yeah.
that's actually guidance that, as an enterprise, B2B company, we actually provide that level of guidance to customers to say, hey, okay, you're trying to accomplish X. What calls are you making? Where does that information live? Do you even have
Yeah.
access to that information? And so, I think, going back to original thing, if you're building out a consumer, like application in concept, it seems very easy that now you're just going to throw, chat GPT into the mix or something like that. People say
Yeah.
chat GPT, but LLMs in general to
Yeah.
just go fix it. But it's actually, um, fairly deep in terms of like trying to figure out these pieces to go create that experience for that
Yeah.
end consumer.
Yeah. There's this one thing that is really apparent to me, which is okay. You pick an LLM, you pick GPT-4 or whatever. You're not going to necessarily use 5 for these chat agents, 4.1 nano or whatever it may be. And there's this conception that the agent is going to get better as you do more calls, but that couldn't be further from the truth because the LLM itself remains the same. There's nothing being written to the LLM to make it better, understand that this was a failure and make it better next time. It's not like a human where it's like it gets frustrated at it and says, "Oh, I felt really bad that time that customer got mad at me. So next time let me make it a different way." Or my manager was listening to the call and gave me feedback. How are you guys thinking about this? Because like the way that ChatGPT knows who you are, it just writes to a database after each
Yeah.
conversation and says, okay, Argam likes technology, Argam likes spirituality, whatever. Just infer those and make him, do some analysis on that. And there's a database that it always refers to. But in a larger scale, when you're having thousands and thousands of calls in the call
Mhm.
center, how can we make those better? How can we make those calls better? I think a lot of people are struggling with that because just like a consumer app, if I were to launch any of the apps that I've had led and built over the years and not looked at the data, not done A/B testing, not done funnel analysis, and actually changed the app, you would have negative growth or stall line growth, which is never good, right? You want to always keep on growing. But I don't feel like there's a lot of knowledge or thought around how to actually make these agents better in a conversational setting.
Yeah, I think that without giving away too much, I would say,
Yeah.
our we started we started Observe AI focused on you know the conclusion of a call, or the what we call post interaction, right?
Yeah.
So after a conclusion, after a call ends, both calls, emails, chats, etc. And we started that about 8 years ago, and obviously a lot's changed. We've built up that product,
Hmm.
made it infused with AI agents and all of that thing as well. Now you take a lot of those learnings and actually, for us specifically, we're in actually great position for that. And let me explain what I mean by that. You've now assessed quality, you know how to run quality on what makes a good interaction, what makes a bad interaction, and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So you can use a lot of those learnings and apply it to a voice AI agent that you've created, and you can use that as a tool to help modify and also influence like how that voice bot should potentially interact for a given call driver, right? So if
Yeah.
you're looking at somebody's calling in about, something simple like an address change, fine. Like, I don't think you're gonna have like much influence over that. But if
Yeah.
they're calling about, their, a particular like technology device, and they need to, debug that, or they need to like do a trade in, like how do you actually best handle that? And I
Yeah.
think a lot of the learnings that you've been able to take from your human agents can greatly influence like what your bot should do. And
Yeah.
then using that same framework to do assess quality can also be used on the bot itself to say, because it's kind of an extension, right? You're looking and saying, hey, I'm assessing quality on a human. I have these 10 different things I'm asking about whether or not they did a good job or not. I should probably apply that to the bot as well to
Do you
assess
think
how
it's the
they
same
did.
thing? Do you think it's the same quality assessments for AI versus human? I'm
I
kind of
think you'll
struggling with that myself. Like,
sure, sure.
is an analysis framework the same for a human as it is for an AI bot?
I mean, the short answer is, of course, it's not. But
Yeah.
there are similarities because you're still managing the conversation, but now you're looking at, different metrics than you would a human being, right? How quickly did they respond? Did they handle an interruption in the right way, right? How fast was it talking? Did it did it crap out in the middle of a call? I don't think a human being would just, you know, I mean, they might freak out on a call, but like
Yeah.
likely not. And so you're measuring different things, but that's more of like a technology assessment. So you're effectively running almost like a judge, like on top. You're doing measurement on the technology side, but you're also running a judge on top of your
Yeah.
on top of the bots that you've created. Like people use LLM judge as an example, right, as a terminology to then assess like how the thing is actually operating. But the root of the conversation itself, I mean, that is, has tremendous similarity with, how a human would handle it. I
Yeah.
think there are nuances, and again, it's a bit like how complicated do you want to make the thing and how real do you want to make it. So, for example, if you wanted to, just have a regular
Hmm.
conversation, or kind of like, hey, how's the weather? Like, how are you doing today? And
Yeah.
you're kind of trying to make it a little bit more human and more personable, right?
Yeah.
You can make the voice AI do those things, but you have to actually provide it with information of like, where do you want that thing to go? So if you wanted
Correct.
to start talking about football because you have a caller in, coming in from Texas, and you want to ask like how the Cowboys are doing or something like that, obviously not well this season, but like
Yeah.
you're then going to make sure you feed it information to be able to handle those type of things. And then if you want to score that, you then have to add that
Yeah.
into your into your QA as well. So
Yeah.
it really depends on like how you're going to view the bot, and how human you're going to actually make that thing.
Yeah. There's this the late Tony Shea, who was an investor advisor to Hit Record, which I was a CPO of. Um, he always would say to us, Zappos is a customer service company that happens to sell shoes. I mean, he said that publicly as well. And every time I've called into Zappos, it's been such a delightful experience. And
Yes.
I don't think anybody else has been able to replicate that. Do you, this is like a two-part question. Number one, how do you think it's even possible to do that in voice AI? number one. Number two, given that, how do you think about regional and geographic differences in voice AI when
Uh,
creating these agents? Let's say you have a nationwide agent you're creating. Would you think about treating someone from Texas versus someone from Michigan versus someone from LA versus someone from New York differently? Or you think that a one size fits all kind of works? So it's like a two-part question. One, how do we get that amazing customer service that I haven't seen replicated much, like Zappos? Like, is that even possible? And two, what do you think about regional differences and cultural differences in these AI agents? Because they're all starting to sound the same, and I don't think people are necessarily enjoying that.
Absolutely. I would say that, like, let's take Zappos as an example, right? Um, there may be, somebody is calling into a contact center not because they want to talk to an agent in a contact center. They're calling because they have a problem, right? Now, in the case of Zappos, I bought, shoes from them as well. And it is a delightful experience when I call into their contact center when I have an issue on something. And what I would say is I'm as a consumer, I'm most concerned about getting whatever I need resolved.
Yeah.
And the faster I get that resolved, the happier I'm going to be. And so, at least for me, I mean, maybe some people, want to talk to somebody, but that's fine. Like for
I
me,
think some
I
people
actually,
do.
yeah, they do, they do. I've listened to enough calls over the years, but I would say that I want to get it resolved as quickly as possible. Now, if I'm Zappos, I'm going to look and say, okay, on a set of my calls, which are can be most automatable, that I feel like will in effect get to 99% of the way, or some percentage of the way,
Yeah.
to what a human can replicate and provide that experience. That is something I probably would look into because, hey, like, I want my agents to deal with the much more difficult and complicated ones and make sure that I have my best agents that are focused on, much more of those complicated issues. And so
Hmm.
I do think there will be a migration, over to that. And in any industry, even ones where, I mean, look, I would say, like, we work with the companies that where contact center is core to their business.
Yeah.
If the contact center goes down for, I mean, I'll pick a brand like Banana Republic or something like that, right? Or
Yeah.
the Gap. Um, is it detrimental to their business? The answer to that is likely not. I mean, it would be very painful. It's not awesome, but
Yeah.
it won't bring things down. But if it, goes down for Comcast, oh my God, like that it would be,
Yeah, because their
it'd be a fire.
main mode of interaction is
That's
voice.
right. So it like, in that situation, I think, any business that is like, highly focused on this, they're going to take, a lot of care in terms of like rolling these things out. And they're going to do a lot of A/B testing in order to figure out, like, hey, is this thing doing the thing that it does without like a substantial drop or any drop, and hopefully improvement on their KPIs,
Yeah.
most related to like CSAT and things like that. And I
Yeah.
think so, and that ties, I think, to your second point, which is as I roll these things out, like, how much personalization actually needs to go into the mix, where I'm
Correct.
going to handle somebody differently from like LA to New York, or am I going to handle, let's say, an older demographic different than a younger demographic, especially if I have that information before they're calling in. And the short answer to that is, like, yes, I actually believe that those things, if you can tune voice AI to make it much more personalized, then you will provide a much better experience. Again, going back to my point when I, kicked off the answer for this, is that, the goal is, getting somebody the answers or the resolution that they need the very first time they're calling in, and hopefully getting them to a positive place at the conclusion of a call as quickly as possible. And
Yeah.
so if you can do that with the things that, and by making things much more personalized across each of these various regions and demographics, then absolutely that is something that a voice AI product should be able to
Yeah.
deliver.
And then when you're doing A/B testing, like for example, on consumer app, most recently I was at Univision, largest Spanish um, streaming service launched. We had, millions and millions of active users, and we'd run A/B tests. And then we would see like 1% increase in watch time, or 2.5%, or 0.5%.
But that
And
was meaningful, I bet, with the
what?
number of people you had. But I'm saying that was meaningful
That
probably
was
with the number of
meaningful,
people.
and
Yeah.
it was like 1% here, 1% that, do the recommendation this
Yeah.
way, make a change this way. But it was, I wouldn't say easy, but it was very clear where it came from. But when you're doing with voice, how do you know what you did actually increased or decreased a certain metric?
Yeah, I mean, there are, so we'll do quite a bit of testing on our end as well, right?
Yeah,
From an A/B testing perspective, and it it is tricky because you're rolling it out, let's say on a percentage of traffic, or um you're modifying like something very small, and you're saying like, hey, was there impact or not? I
yeah,
mean, I would say it's not it's not so different than, like, let's say you're doing it on a website and you're making a change over there. You're
yeah,
essentially trying to, figure out like, hey, I've rolled this change out, and then am I achieving like statistical significance for the change that I made to indicate that like, hey, you know, AHT actually went down, but my CSAT score and my first call resolution, went up. Or, hey, my
yeah.
AHT went down, but now they're calling in a second time. And so that actually didn't achieve what I was looking to do because my overall like handle time net, went up. So I think it's a lot of like the very
But
similar things.
you have to
Yeah.
pick one small area to make sure that you
Yes.
isolate where you're kind of like,
Correct.
whether
Like,
it's a
what's your
voice or an accent. And how do you look at? Do you look at
mm,
do you look at the types of calls that came in? Because if you're randomly assigning and in that random assignment, one variant had very angry customers that were just angry from the beginning, you probably have to look at that in assessing your success or failure.
it is tough. Like your your hope there, and I think it's hope today, but it can get more sophisticated tomorrow, is that, you'll smooth it out over, you know, 5,000, 5,000 calls, 10,000 calls. Like,
Yeah,
you'll be able to gather enough data such that those nuances won't be so skewed. Like, if you're not doing like for like, then you've set up your test wrong, right? Similar
yeah,
to like, to web, but over the course of time, you just need scale. Like, on smaller businesses, it's much more difficult, right? You might get 5,000 in, you know, a month or 3 months, like, but in larger enterprises, like, you'll get 7,000 calls a day, and or
yeah,
10,000 calls a day or more than that. And you're able to then figure out like very quickly like where this is going, and you're able to handle and make those tweaks. Now, I think to your point of like, where do I make the tweak? Um, that part is tricky to isolate, because let's
yeah,
say you used one voice versus another. And if that's your only change, then that's great. But if it was your voice plus your prompt was a little bit different,
yeah,
or the temperature of like, how much, I don't want to say how much it would go off the rails, like meaning like it was maybe a little bit more chatty, right? Than something else. Like if you have, three or four different variations of things,
yeah,
then, similar to an A/B test, it'll become very different to uh to to isolate.
yeah,
I would say that, making, you kind of make those different changes, and if there is like such skewed data and you needed to like uh isolate, then you remove variables like from the mix, very similar to what you do on a web A/B
yeah,
test.
yeah. That makes sense. And how do you think about like regional events that are external to your agent? For example, there's a voice AI revolution happening, right? Before you needed a lot of money to launch these things. Now with platforms such as Retail, Vappy, and Synthflow, etc.,
Yeah.
anybody can launch an agent. Not to say they're going to be a good agent, they're going to launch an
Yes.
agent. And these are going to be regional agents for small to mid-sized businesses. So let's say you're a San Francisco flower shop, you have 3 locations, and that day, both BART and Caltrain are having problems. Caltrain hits something and is shut down, and BART is having some problems. So everyone's all in up in arms. And then you see your voice agent's performance degrading that day. I always would ask this type of question for product managers that I would be interviewing. I would ask them, you know, your sign up screen on one day had a 20% drop in signups. Like, how do you know what went wrong? So at the same time, how do you, if you're seeing that in the metrics and you're seeing higher frustration and lower sentiment and your analysis, how do you go about assessing whether that was your agent or it was a regional event that went affected the global or the regional, let's say, thought patterns or regional
Yeah.
emotions?
Sure. Like something went on. Like let's say you know, you're like Lyft or something like that, and all of a sudden, there is a strike at SFO airport, and all of
Yeah,
a sudden there's a bunch of angry people like as a
yeah,
result of
exactly.
the strike,
Yeah,
like something along those lines.
yeah,
So, in it's tricky because um you're not going to just everyone's not going to be abreast of every single thing that happens. And let's just isolate to the United States for a second, like everything that's going on. Sure, if there's like a major event, you probably will hear about it on, national news or X or something like that.
yeah,
Fine. But if it's something regional, like you described, I think that's where your analytics comes into play. Because, if you're using like a more of like an SMB approach, the flower shop with three different locations, right? I think that's where the analytics comes into play that says, hey, what are, specific themes that are now coming out within these calls itself, right? Like, is there a spike or a trend that's actually occurring, which
yeah,
you just haven't seen before? So it's not like my bot went off the rails, and it's doing the wrong thing, but maybe people are just upset like, "Hey, I'm not getting my flowers. I have my wedding. Like, what the heck is going on? It's not getting delivered to me." Whatever it might be.
yeah,
And, over there, do you have, the voice AI still needs to connect in the same way that your contact center does,
yep,
right? Like if you think about your contact center operations, it can't behave in isolation outside of like whatever you would have done with a human being. In that
mhm,
situation, your contact center is going to be like, like let's say even in a remedial like setup, hey, you turn to your supervisor, hey, I'm getting a bunch of calls on X, Y, and Z is taking place. Uh,
yep.
d- you know this is the fourth call I've gotten today about this. Like, is there something going on?
Yeah, so
you
we
know
have to identify those patterns and let
yes.
let the customer know that this is, not in regards to the voice agent, but it might be an external factor.
Exactly. So now you have to decipher what's going on in the conversations. You need that, what we call conversation intelligence to then understand that this is taking place. You kind of surface it and spike that this is going on so that people are aware, like, oh, like maybe I should listen to a few of these calls to understand like what's actually taking place, or hey, it's bubbled up that suddenly we
Yeah,
we see an issue that we hadn't seen before.
awesome. So last question, what would you give as advice to any person or product manager wanting to get into the voice AI space or the AI space as a product manager, junior product manager or an engineer? What can they do to develop their skills in AI product management or voice AI product management?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say one thing, which is you have to experiment and play around with the technologies that exist out there. See, there's a lot of people that are like, "Oh yeah, I can totally do it. I could just go to ChatGPT and like type in things." Like those people are trying to find out like how do I cook a lasagna or something like that,
Yeah,
right? That doesn't count. You have to get in there and, understand and really, you know, play around with, "Hey, how do I create a bot? If I were to
mhm,
create a bot, like how would I do it using ChatGPT?" I'd go
yeah,
play around with Vape and some of these technologies out there and try to compose things and just build it yourself. And there's no like recipe per se. A lot of this is just going to be trial and error and being very entrepreneurial about, learning a lot of these things. I was at a dinner last night actually, and
mhm,
it was having, this very, you know, specific conversation where, there was an individual there who was saying like, hey, the it's all like eng led at this point. PMs are kind of in some ways almost like out the door. Like it's,
yeah,
it's all like eng led and so forth. And I would say that there is, some marginal truth to that, which is the PMs that will not embrace the change in how do I build an AI agent or think about building things in an agentic way. Yeah, I do think they will in the longer term struggle to keep up. The ones that will embrace it and actually get down into the next level of detail on the technology side, really understand the technology, understand the art of possible, and try to build things on their own, those are the ones that are going to, survive and thrive. So my
yeah,
advice is, embrace it, get in there, try to build things on your own, even if it's some like even if it's something that somebody else has built before, you try to build it. Just try to do
Correct.
it on your own, and you will learn so much as a result of doing that.
Yeah. I equate it to the App Store launching,
That's
and
a great
everyone was saying
example.
there's an app for that, and only a few apps actually survive because you were creating apps, let's say it's Eng-led. It wasn't until you had product management, you really understood the customer and really cared for the customer. Like I was at VapiCon, and everyone was talking about latency and voice to text, all these engineering led technologies, but there was very little conversation around what are the customer needs, do people actually want, how do you make a delightful experience, an experience that actually you want to call, and you look forward to talking to. So I think a lot of that, in it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it because this is the natural progression of any digital product and natural. But now is the time where uh, the most amazing product leaders and product managers should be experimenting and creating great experiences.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Vache. I really appreciate the time and being officially the first guest on the podcast.
All right. I'm
Yeah.
pumped. Thank you.
All right. Speak soon, my friend.
Will do.